So the camera tutorial example is pretty much focused on just the camera API. And we're not going to go through this thing word for word or anything like that, but we can see it does have 7 modules that come with it.
Welcome to this office hour here on this August 29th. We are talking about what makes a tutorial world tick. So we'll go into details of how, some stuff that Blue and I uh, have been talking about in regards to tutorial worlds and we're excited to share with you what we've come up with. So I'm Tellous, joined with Seeing Blue here and we are going to get this thing started. All right. So, what do we have on the table today? So, Blue and I, we like to think about the tutorial side of things because we've come from a history of teaching a lot of people how to build in Horizon Worlds. So, we've had a lot of experience with seeing how people navigate the documentation, the just the general intuitiveness of the application itself. And sometimes, there's just different ways people learn different things. And we've been picking up on all those things. So we wanted to get together, get this office hour session where we sort of break down some common framework, if you will, to sort of describe the way that we are perceiving these, the challenging moments of tutorials or even like the things that are successful and really fun to see about tutorials. So with that in our agenda, what we're going to be covering is these 3 categories that we've sort of bundled together to talk about, what is helpful and hurtful in those different categories. And so we've got design for clarity and progress, engage through experience, and teach with empathy and purpose. And after we'll do a Q&A. So what we'll be doing as well is I'll be talking about the points that, help and hurt these different categories, and Blue will demonstrate in live tutorial worlds, examples of some of these things and some questions we can answer to see if we are hitting the mark or missing the mark. So when creating a tutorial, we want to aim for the mark, right? So, this title of this session is, what makes a tutorial world tick. But in general, tutorials, it it can apply to, all aspects of it, whether it's you're having somebody learn how to build a world, you're having somebody learn how to play your game, right? And so there's different aspects to it as it affects us as Horizon creators, right? And so what we've done here is categorize things that we like as hitting the mark and things that we're not a big fan of as missing the mark. And so what is hitting the mark, right? And so here I've defined it as it achieves the intended results, right? So if you're looking to have the player, take an action, then good. If the tutorial made them take an action, that's how you validate whether it's working or not, right? In some more complex things, right? Think like some more complex scripting, things like that. You want them to be able to get to the end of the section of the tutorial, right? And feel good about what they've done, right? And so that's the second point here, encourages progression and completion, right? So it's another aspect to just reward or notice how the reader or whoever is consuming the tutorial, they are making progress. Maybe it's not, they haven't made it to the very end, but all in between there's many moments to celebrate, many wins and things like that. Completing something, that's the best moment to celebrate, right? And so we want to look for those things when we're defining what hits the mark, right? And so what misses the mark is when we see moments of like confusion, right? Of like things that are leading the consumer of the tutorial to like get distracted, to just do the wrong thing, right? Because they just don't know. So just looking for what am I saying, as I'm building the tutorial, what am I saying that like make sure to keep people on track, make sure to keep them, not overloaded with things. They need to be able to walk through this in a reasonable, state of mind. So the worst part of missing the mark, right, is that it leads to the incompletion of the task. like if somebody gives up the tutorial halfway, that's just, what it's worth investigating what is causing that. And so we've done that investigation, right? So we have these categories that we want you to all think about. And this is just going to be a way that we like a language that we can use as we're going and looking through tutorial worlds, looking through tutorial videos, anything, any kind of tutorial. And this is like a set of categories and language that we can use to say, like, oh, I am liking this part. I'm not liking this part because specifically of these marks that are being hit or marks that are being missed. So let's take a look at one now. Right here, we've got design for clarity and progress. So in this category, what it means to hit the mark is where the tutorial is focused on one clear goal at a time, right? So, think of often there's, as creators, right? We know how many things we have to touch. There's audio, there's particle effects, there's models, there's scripting, there's all this stuff to do. So, when we are creating a tutorial for any particular thing, it's important to like think about, maybe just this one that I'm making only has, this portion of like particle effects, right? Or this portion of a scripting concept, right? And I'm going to build it in a step-by-step manner that leads to me being able to like see where there's any fall off, right? So even though it's one goal, there's still going to be many steps, right? And so that is that is something that will help the will help for understand help for the tutorial being more clear and allowing for better progress, right? Something else that hits the mark: using simple language and concrete examples. So that is making sure. Actually, let's rewind for a second. So I want to talk about the missing the mark on the focusing on one clear goal, right? Because these hits the mark and miss the mark, they correlate sort of, right? There's this aspect of like uh it's almost like zero sum. It's almost like you can pick one path and it helps the whoever's reading the tutorial be able to accomplish their goals, and then you could pick the complete opposite path, right? So we need to know about that opposite path that takes you in the complete opposite direction where you just don't want to take them, right? So in the case of focusing on one clear goal, we've got trying to teach too much at once without clear prioritization, right? So that is overloading the user, not making it to where it's clear how things are going to play out, right? So it's just kind of like it feels endless or feels like there's just not a clear understanding of how you're moving through the goal itself. So that's the opposite direction, right? So in the hits the mark, we've got use simple language, concrete examples, right? That's just making sure you're treating it as if the person on the other side hasn't heard all the acronyms that you've heard of, hasn't done all the training that you've heard of, right? Oftentimes, especially in like Horizon Worlds tutorials, some of these creators are new to creating a world entirely, right? And so this is a important detail. Make sure that you're able to communicate to those people without going too off with your own language. Concrete examples, of course, that is an opportunity to give the person that real proof that it actually did the thing, it worked. And that's oftentimes somebody will like there's people who will take a finished product and sort of break it apart, right? So that's kind of adapting to their learning style as well when you're giving those concrete examples. So opposite of that, using jargon or abstract concepts before the learners are ready, right? Just like it's just too many crazy words, too many acronyms, and they're not ready. They don't even know where to go to learn the previous portion. So that is worth considering. Last part here on hits the mark, we've got structure, content with logical flow, bite-sized chunks and checkpoints. That's making sure that as you're moving through the tutorial, it feels like things are building on each other, right? It feels like I am able to sort of like isolate this portion in my mind and focus in on it and know that I don't have to go scroll up over there, open this over here and do all that. Where like it didn't feel intuitive. If everything is close together and there's moments where you can let the reader or the creator or whoever's consuming the tutorial, let them breathe for a moment, right? Let them come back, leave and come back and have a way that they're able to see how to do that, right? Like feel good about leaving, come back and knowing that they're not going to come at it from like, oh, if I walk away now, I'll forget everything I learned, right? So, we'll see examples of that here in this next slide. But the last part here is skipping context, leaving learners unsure why it matters, right? That's the opposite of that structure and that logical flow. You're just you're assuming too much of the person. You're wanting them to sort of connect the dots themselves, and that's just not fun when you're learning. It can be fine if as long as if you want to do some sort of approach where you're really challenging the user to understand things with the hard work of connecting the dots. It's just important to let them know up front. And so you might hit the mark if you want them to be challenged, but you let them know ahead of time that it's going to be covered. All right, so let's move on to the next
Okay.
slide.
I think the next one's mine. So thank you, Matt. So what we'll do now is we'll take these 3 points that Matt just spoke about, and we're going to look at one of Meta's tutorial worlds. And when we get done, we're going to be able to answer the questions. Is the tutorial focused? Did it use simple language? And does it flow well? So we've got these 3 questions lined up. And before the workshop today, I picked out one of the tutorial worlds that Meta had put together for us. And I applied what Matt just taught us to the tutorial world. And I basically gave it a pass or a fail on each one of these 3 topics. And so by doing this, hopefully you guys get a better idea of what a good tutorial looks like, what a bad tutorial looks like, and then possibly even walk away with the ability to better provide constructive criticism tutorials that may come out in the future, right? So let's take a look at the camera API examples tutorial. So this was the one that I picked to go through, and we're more or less going to judge this thing based on what Matt just told us. So the camera tutorial example is pretty much focused on just the camera API. And we're not going to go through this thing word for word or anything like that, but we can see it does have 7 modules that come with it. And if we just scan over the first module here, we do see it does start to kind of set us up for what to expect, talking about some key learning objectives, how to switch the camera, when to switch the camera, changes to interactive models based on the camera. There's also a section about some things that we'll need, like before you begin, you might want to take a look at tutorial prerequisites and assumptions, which is one of the tutorials prior to this one. So, those are some good call outs. There's more prerequisites down here. So they do a decent job of setting us up. But let's take a look at the questions that was on our form. The first one was, is it focused? And in this particular example, I give it a pass. It is fairly focused with the exception of the last module. So there's a clear progression through the modules, and we are mainly talking about cameras here. And it does very little deviation from modules 1 through 6. But I did note, and I didn't fail it for this because it's not egregious, but I did note that in module 7, we do start this other systems kind of category. And we start talking about things like 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 weapons and a combat system or guns and a gun system. And so that does begin to kind of deviate from our original topic in the first 6 modules. But I wouldn't consider it's like I said, it's not terribly egregious. They were very short and they really are just kind of linking you to some continued learning, which is honestly great. So is it focused? I give this tutorial a pass. But the next question was, does it use simple language? And honestly, I failed it on this one. Although in the tutorial, it it does make a point of explaining things like the player camera and a player camera manager and camera modes. It does, you'll find in this tutorial, it does still use jargon. Some of the jargon I noted is like race conditions or non-deterministic. And so, although a lot of people may know what those mean, I'm going to venture to say there are some beginners that don't, and this tutorial doesn't make any effort to really explain those. And so when we're talking about jargon, I mean that's a prime example of what we mean. Now, ways that it could have possibly improved this approach is it could have added a glossary of terms potentially with definitions, or it could have provided a simple analogy after it used the term, just to give a beginner reader a better understanding of what it means when it uses, those technical terms. The third and last question that we'll ask or we'll answer regarding this tutorial is, does it flow? And I kind of gave it a pass and a fail because it does provide a logical flow between the modules and it uses chunking fairly effectively, but it lacks checkpoints. It could have provided small challenges to test the reader's knowledge, and that would have been a great opportunity to really celebrate the reader. And so it does none of those things. It's really just direct, to the point, technical, matter of fact, next step. And so, like I said, logically it flows, but it could have done more as far as challenging the reader and celebrating their accomplishments.
So that that previous portion we talked about was designing for clarity and progress. And so now we're going to move on to engage through experience. And so this list, what we have as our first point of hitting the mark is building a narrative that mirrors the learner's journey to make it relatable, right? And so that is, when you think about creators, we're all on this journey of ultimately wanting to publish a world, share with our friends, have the next hit in Horizon Worlds, or maybe it's just something to share with our friends. But that is a narrative that each of us lives, right? And so that's something that can be tapped into, right? In some of these tutorials as a way to keep keep that in the forefront of the journey of the learning journey, right? And so the opposite of that is dry, boring content, right? Where it's just only technical, it's only exactly what you need, right? And so that can feel less fun, right? It's when we're learning, it can be pretty intense, especially if you're learning a lot at once. It can feel pretty heavy to just keep hearing like the dry aspects of the creation, right? At a point, you start to like feel tired or feel uninterested, right? And so that, leaning on that narrative would help on that front, right? So the next point here on hits the mark is prioritize hands-on practice with immediate feedback and early wins to boost motivation, right? So that's more on that on we're talking more about feeling, right? It's less so about the preciseness of the content, right? And more so, this is when you're analyzing your tutorial, you're looking for feeling. You're testing with others too, right? Like go have somebody who's newer try out your tutorial and see, where can you see them you know having those like moments and and sort of following up with like you in your tutorial, you're giving them these like celebration moments and you see the person react positively. They got a smile on their face. They're ready to scroll on to the next point, right? Those are great marks or hitting of the mark. And so the opposite of that is focusing only on abstract content, no encouragement to apply the knowledge, right? It's just imagine just having a glossary or trying to read through the dictionary, right? It's like that aspect of like, you know, where is it telling me to go and do it, right? So make sure you leverage that moment to like say like, hey, let's, don't forget to remind the reader like, hey, go try it, right? Go see how this portion, is easy enough for you to try right now. And finally, we have encourage exploration and celebrate progress to foster confidence and momentum. And so that is like, think about once the tutorial ends, or even like in the middle of the tutorial, we have sometimes our brains kind of want to scroll and we're like, oh, but that sounded interesting over there, or and that's okay, right? As long as, you have a way for them to kind of hook back into your tutorial, and that you encourage it, right? Of like, yeah, if you like this tutorial, go try that one over there. That might actually, based on you experiencing this tutorial, you might have an easier time understanding that one as well, right? So that is, leaning on the momentum of that reader, knowing that, they're ready to learn. And so the opposite of that is abruptly moving on to next topics with no acknowledgement of progress and wins. Excuse me. So, don't just leave them to sort of like either figure out, they don't need to just like end up in another tutorial um by happenstance, right? By just like you forcing them to just see other stuff, and like no concept of like realizing that they're building on their creator journey narrative, right? So make sure to, once again, just keep celebrating those wins and that progress. Pass it back to you, Blue.
Thank you. So let's take a look at the same tutorial again, and let's answer three more questions. Does the narrative make you feel more engaged? Do you feel encouraged to get hands-on? And are you feeling more confident and motivated after completing the tutorial? And so again, we're looking at the Camera API examples tutorial. And let's look, actually, let's see, I've got my notes. I need to scroll back. So in this particular tutorial, we asked the question, is the narrative engaging? And I gave it a fail in this case. So while this tutorial is very functional, it does lack a strong narrative. There's a clear presentation here, but it has no story. It's not relatable or engaging. It has a very dry tone and it's very technical. So there's no overarching project that we're working towards. Instead, they could have framed this as something like, let's build a movie set where we're the director. And then so carrying on with that particular goal in mind, you can start to frame a story as the director of this movie that you're working to properly film using the camera API. And so it missed that opportunity. And I would say, if you're writing tutorials, try to incorporate that into your tutorials, right? It really keeps the users engaged. The next question we want to answer was, does it encourage hands-on? I think that's what it said, right? Do you feel encouraged to get hands-on? Yeah. And so in this case, I gave this tutorial a pass. It is a very hands-on tutorial. It encourages you to open your project and work alongside the tutorial, and follow along with code snippets. So I think it actually does a great job with encouraging people to get their hands dirty. And the third question was, does it leave you with a feeling of confidence or or motivation? And honestly, I kind of cheated here, and I gave it both a pass and a fail because it did it to a degree, but I think it could have also improved. And so that's why we get a both pass and fail here. So if a reader successfully completes the tutorial, I think they would feel confident in their abilities. But without things like checkpoints and a motivating narrative, they could feel frustrated and may not actually complete it. So that's not really kind of the goal that we're looking for here. If we take a look at the bottom of these, they have a section called checkpoint, but really it's just talking about the things that you would have learned. But like again, there's no encouragement, there's no celebration of having gotten to this point, and there's no testing of knowledge here. Again, no story. Without those things, it starts to become really challenging for a lot of readers to complete it. Let's see, that very quickly answers our three questions there. So let's move on to the next set of pillars. Matt?
All righty, thank you, Blue. And so let's round it out here with teach with empathy and purpose, right? So this to me is, particularly important because, I think a lot of times, it's really satisfying when there's this concept of like somebody who's like very technically sound and just full of knowledge. It's like really acknowledging the human on the other side that is having to sort of consume all this stuff that they're spitting out, right? Or they're or they're writing down. And so there's just that like that moment of connection that is like, oftentimes when we're thinking about sharing of knowledge, right? We're thinking about productivity and getting things out, publishing things and at the end of the day there's people involved in that process, right? And so that is why this section to me, it's really important in regards to tutorials. So let's take a look at this first point here. So how do we hit the mark on empathy and purpose? We've got assume no prior knowledge but respect the learner's intelligence, right? And so that is to say, like, there's moments where we don't know exactly what somebody knows, and so we don't want to like turn it into kindergarten time, right? Just like start it back from the beginning. How do we speak English or something? I don't know. But that idea of like we don't necessarily have to take it that far back. But we do need to like acknowledge that sometimes there's some aspects of our learning that where we have common ground and we can start to acknowledge like, hey, I can imagine if you came to this tutorial, you really want to do this tutorial. Uh, there is some aspects of things that you may want to know first, and I want to let you know that up front, right? I want to give you the opportunity to not be halfway in this tutorial going, what did I just sign up for, right? So that is, that's a good check to do there. And so the opposite of that is assuming a one size fits all delivery, right? And that's just running through the steps and crossing your fingers and hope the reader gets it on the other side, right? Second point here, we got support diverse learning styles and anticipate common errors with friendly guidance, right? And so, we have that's kind of a two-part thing where the we think of the different learning styles of like visual, tactile, auditory, and things like that. We think of those, and what comes to mind is like images, videos, audio, alt text on when we think of like somebody who's needing to use devices that for accessibility, things like that, right? And so like oftentimes this one can be one of the more challenging ones to like, especially when working with teams or like tight deadlines, right? It's the thing that might be like missed, right? But when you think about these things, it's like another moment to be able to sort of double check on whether you really like if you go and build this out and it's just not like doesn't meet the needs of if you think of like if you meet the needs of these of people who might just need a little more help in learning a topic, be it you're giving annotated images or adding audio to the learning, think about how many more people you can touch with that level of support, right? And so when more people are supported, right, that makes the influence larger of like, oh wow, this tutorial like really thought about all these aspects. And that, it's a great feeling to know that, people can rely on you to care about these aspects, and ultimately seeking out more information from you, because they can rely on you, and they know you respect their learning styles. And then the opposite, right, is just not doing it. Pretty straightforward. On the last point here on hits the mark, we mention explain the why and leave the learners understanding skill. Sorry, explain the why and leave the learners with understanding, skill, and confidence. And so that is, for oftentimes when especially when you're having like a lot of dry tutorials, right? You can get lost in the sauce, and you feel like you've just gained too much information, or you're all over the place. And if there was no moments of like reminding you of like how you can start to apply this, like how is this making you a better creator, or whatever it is that you're doing your tutorial. Maybe it's, you be better at the game, right? If this is a tutorial for your world and teaching people how to play, giving them the why, that's huge. That's how you give that person that feeling of purpose, right? Of now I can, go harder. I can enjoy the experience more because I get it. And so the opposite here is skipping context, leaving learners unsure why it matters, right? So yeah, just remember to give the readers some more context, and continue to make them feel empowered and cared for. So pass it over to you, Blue.
All right, so let's take these 3 marks regarding empathy and purpose, and let's apply them to our camera API tutorial with 3 questions. They are, can you tell whether your skills are appropriate for the tutorial? If not, do you know where to go to find something more adequate? And if we were to judge our example tutorial here, I gave this one a pass. If it does make an effort to respect the reader's knowledge. So in module 1, it states things like the desktop editor and TypeScript knowledge is assumed here. It links to previous tutorials for beginners in order to get you started. So I think overall we did a good job, in the first question, making sure that the reader knows what to expect, and that if they don't have the adequate skills, they know where to go find those skills. The next question is anyway, do visual guides feel as captivating as text, and what about audio? So in our example, do the visual guides feel captivating? And honestly, I'm going to give this one a fail. If we scroll through any of these modules, we do have images, but really they're not doing much for us. Some of them don't even have images at all. I mean, this is an example of what pan camera looks like from different angles, but that's really it. So there's no images or videos here to illustrate concepts for us. None of what is available helps to really do that for us. So if the tutorial was to add short videos or animations to demonstrate the different camera modes, that might have been a lot more helpful. Even here where it talks about fixed cameras, I mean, it gives us a picture of a camera from a particular angle, but I don't know. I just feel like that doesn't do much. I would like to see maybe a short video or a short animated image that kind of shows what the behavior is as the camera is being moved or swiveled, or whatever you want to call it. So ultimately, I think it could have done better in answering that question or solving that particular mark. The next question is, do you understand why you are learning this particular thing? So in this case, I did give the tutorial both a pass and fail, because it does decently to explain the why in each module for the camera modes. but I think it could have been more compelling. And this is really where its lack of story and narrative kind of fail it continually. As we're answering these questions, that has came up a few times. So I hope by now you're starting to kind of get the idea of just how important a story and narrative can be to your tutorials. But this one could have been potentially improved by adding a narrative, or it could have improved answering the why by having more of a narrative to answer it with. For example, like letting the players watch a sporting event by putting them in the action. At a very minimum, would have been a great addition to this tutorial to really help answer why you need this camera mode or that camera mode. That gets through our 3 questions. Let's see, what do we have next?
That's great. So yeah, so first of all, I want to thank everybody for coming to this discussion. I, this, like I mentioned earlier, it comes from the idea of me and Blue, having taught several people and sort of wanting to figure out why, we often hear that idea of that some tutorials may or may not be helpful. And so what we covered now was a way to sort of build a framework around those complaints or those celebrations that we have around the tutorials that we experience, particularly around the category of design for clarity and progress, engage through experience, and teach with empathy and purpose. I hope this has been informative to you all. I do want to keep the conversation going and hear how y'all think about these tutorial worlds. So I'll leave you with this statement here, which is basically focused, hands-on, human-friendly. If you hold on to those terms as you're building out your tutorials, that will increase uh, the quality of those tutorials. So thank you all for coming.